Welcome back to Intellectual Potluck. If it's your first time here, welcome. We're very happy to have you. And if you've been here before, welcome back. You'll notice that I'm actually on my own today if you don't count Arlo, and I don't think he's planning on being very chatty. I've decided that this topic wouldn't be great to do with a guest because it's something that I'm particularly opinionated on, and it's probably just going to turn into me ranting, so probably something that I'm better off doing solo. Like when I have someone on, I quite like to give them the floor and choose something that they're very interested in. This is really just one for me. Let's see how we go. I haven't recorded by myself before, so I think this will be interesting all around. And today we're going to be chatting about multi-level marketing. So I know that this can be a very divisive topic depending on which side of the MLM world you fall on. So please just bear in mind that these are all just my opinions, my observations, my research, and my own personal experiences in this case. But right now seems like a really good time to talk about it because a lot of MLMs in America are actually starting to not go out of business, but change their business model so that they're no longer doing the multi-level marketing structure, which is a really positive thing for the anti-MLM space, which has grown quite a lot in the last few years. And a lot of regulatory bodies like the FTC are starting to clamp down on them a lot. So I thought now seems like a really good time to throw my 2 cents in and pile on the pressure that's being generated by so many better creators. To anyone who doesn't know what multi-level marketing is, it's basically a sales model where each salesperson is an independent contractor, or I can't remember what they call them in America, but we called them an independent contractor in Australia. And so they're technically their own business. They are a hired out contractor who is contracted to sell stuff. And there are 2 ways to make money in a multi-level marketing program. The first is by selling stuff, on which you'll make commission, and the second is by recruiting people. And then the people who are on your team or downline, you make money from their sales too. And it's the recruitment aspect of these that generally makes it a really divisive topic, which we'll go into a bit more detail on later. But those are the only real ways to make money. You don't make a salary, you don't have a base pay, nothing like that. It's all commission or commission from your downline. There are a lot of amazing creators, like I mentioned, who do specialize in this type of content. I'll link some of my favorites in the YouTube video description. By all means, go and check them out. They explain this so much better than I do. I'm really just here to share my own personal experiences because I have been involved in a multi-level marketing company before. And yeah, I love their content because I relate to it. And so I just wanted to share my own experiences. I originally landed in multi-level marketing when I was in Australia as a backpacker. I was living in Sydney. I was there for a year, and basically I had 4 months left on my visa and didn't have a job. Needed to find one, needed to find someone who was willing to take me on for 4 months and didn't mind that I would then be up and leaving. So I was actually approached on the street by someone and we just got chatting and they said that they had this great opportunity. So they put me in touch with this company, and it's a bit of a weird interview process. I thought I was going in for an interview. It turned out to be a group interview, though part of me even doubts that because some of the answers that the other people were giving were really weird. I don't know. It was very strange. But either way, I ended up getting the job. And so the whole point was going door to door, trying to get people to subscribe to be regular donors to charities, which was something that really appealed to me. I like being a bit philanthropic and like supporting charities. So this felt like a win-win. So I was onboarded and started learning about network marketing and, how it's totally not all dodgy. Though I do remember a really funny moment when my team leader sat me down and was explaining about network marketing, and she was explaining how the people on the bottom level, they make sales and then some of that money goes to their upline, and basically she drew it out on a whiteboard and it ended up looking like a pyramid. So it's very, very funny, but no one else seemed to see the joke or find it funny. So but anyway, so I started doing door-to-door in Australia and it really wasn't too bad. There was some unethical sales strategies going on, but nothing too wild. I did end up going to one of their sales conferences, which was very strange. The top salespeople are basically treated like gods, and I hadn't been in for very long when I went to this thing, and so I felt really strange, but again, no one else seemed to find it funny, so I was just bit my tongue and carried on. But going to this conference was very much framed as something that I had to do to prove my commitment, so if I didn't go, I thought I'd be seen as negging or I guess bringing down the vibes, which was something that was thrown around quite a lot, not just at me, but at other people, that you had to be positive and, happy and smiley at all times. Otherwise, you were bringing other people on the team down and sabotaging them and sabotaging their opportunity, which was always very strange. Even the team leaders, you could never approach them and ask for tips on sales, because then that would be admitting that it's not super easy. And I never actually got any sales advice, because if I went to someone for advice, it would be admitting that I can't do it, when the way that they framed it was that it should just be the easiest thing in the world. But anyway, my time in Oz was generally okay. Really, the biggest issue that I had in Australia was that the job was 100% commission-based, and I do want to state for the record that I am the worst salesperson in the entire world. I could be given a surefire sale and I would talk them out of it. I'm terrible. So, of course, I was broke as all hell when I was doing this job. And it wasn't too much of a problem for me personally, because luckily at the time I was with my partner Grant, and he let me stay with him rent-free. So as long as I made just enough money to buy some food, I was getting by okay. So I was in a very, very lucky situation here, that most people aren't lucky enough to be in. But of course I also never recruited, mostly because I was such a terrible salesperson, and so it didn't make sense for me to think that I could train someone to be a salesperson. Logically, I just couldn't get my brain past that hurdle. I was definitely encouraged to recruit, but never did, because I was like, until something clicks and until I can get a hang of it, how can I teach someone else to do it? And what's interesting is, I was watching a video by another creator, and they were saying that the head of an MLM called Body, they did a survey of a bunch of their salespeople, and 40% of them said that they didn't, or around 40% of them said that they didn't feel comfortable recruiting. And, there's various reasons why, but it was really interesting to know that I wasn't the only one. But anyway, so I did my 4 months in Australia. It was all fine. It was all done. But when I left, I was put in contact with someone who's part of the same company in the UK. And in the UK is when things really started to go downhill for me. For one, the commission that you could make in the UK was a lot lower. Even factoring in the exchange rate, it was something like 60% less. It was crazy. I don't know how anyone was surviving on that money. And, this time around, Grant did come back to the UK with me, but he was coming back and forth to Australia, so he didn't really have a reliable stream of income either, because he was having to travel back and forth so much. So this time, my personal money situation actually mattered. But also, the UK office was a whole nother level of culty compared to the Australian office. I'll give a few more details a bit later on, but basically by the time I'd been in this office for a few months, I was really at the end of my tether, and I genuinely believed that if I couldn't succeed at this, then I was going to fail at everything in life. That was the mindset that was built up at this company. And I was also still believing that if I wasn't making it work, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. Which is really crazy when I look back on it and see how hard I was working. I was literally doing 12-hour days, 6 days a week. But I still had this mindset that if I just worked that little bit harder, something will click, and then suddenly it would be as easy for me as they were saying it should be. But spoiler alert, didn't happen. So to cut a long story short, I ended up with no money. I was making no sales really, and I still refused to recruit because I still believed I wouldn't be able to train them. And by this point I was like, if I'm this bad off with money, I don't want to put someone else in this situation. But I still was waiting for that moment for it to click, so I still wasn't leaving. And it got to the point where I literally could not afford my rent. And I can still remember going to the bank one day to ask them for an overdraft just so that I could pay that month's rent, and then assuming that, sometime in that month things would click and then start to pick up and everything would be better and I'd be able to afford my rent the next month. And I feel so bad for the bank teller. She tried so hard, but of course I had no money coming in, so they couldn't justify giving me an overdraft. I burst into tears. It was a whole mess. I feel so bad for the position I put her in, but I was really at such a low point at that time. And I was too proud and embarrassed to admit any of this to my family as well. But I was very lucky. My wonderful best friend, shout out to Aaron, he stepped in and he actually gave me the money for my rent. I don't know if he knows how big of a hole he pulled me out of, but yeah, I don't know what I would have done without him, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. And I would really love to say that this was the point where I realized that sales wasn't for me and I quit. I would love to say that. It's not. And I'll get into the details why for a bit, because looking back on it in hindsight, I can now see why. But yeah, I stayed. Luckily, I think I only lasted another week before things really blew up, so I didn't get myself too much further into the hole than I was already in. Basically, the straw that broke the camel's back was I was in a morning meeting with the entire office, and the CEO was talking about attitude and how sales is all about attitude, and how if we weren't selling, it must be because our attitude sucks. And then he turns to me and he says, "See, Sam is proof of this. Look at how miserable Sam looks. That's why she's not selling anything." And by this point, I think this meeting happened on a Thursday, so I'd worked 3 days that week, all at least 12-hour days, and I had made no sales. So I'd worked 36 hours for free, and I was just done. I was beaten, I was done. I don't think I said anything, but I definitely rolled my eyes. My team leader had a bit of a go at me for that later on, saying that that was just proof that my attitude sucked. But I think being called out in such a disrespectful way by a CEO in that moment, that's what, shattered the glass and made me realize that I was done. So I did end up going out into the field that day to sell, mostly just because I didn't want to let the team down. I was already there. I'd already spent the train fare to get in, so I was like, may as well do it. May as well just go out there. But I think I knocked on one door and didn't even do my sales pitch. I just said, "I'm so sorry for bothering you," and walked away, sat on the curb for a bit, and then left. I quit. And luckily, I think it took about a month, but luckily I found an amazing job after that. I had a boss who was willing to take a chance on me, which was very lucky because the MLM wouldn't give me a reference. Apparently, once you leave, you're dead to them. Big shock there. But yeah, I got lucky, I got out of it, and life moved on. So that's a really quick overview of my story. I say quick, it probably wasn't that quick, but that's an overview of my story. And I know I've painted a very negative light on MLMs. That's not an accident. I'm biased in this topic. I'm not even going to pretend otherwise. No, I really do hate them. And I think it's a really unethical business model to do. And I really do think that they are commercial cults. The whole attitude and environment that they build up, we'll get into some more details now. So obviously this was my story, but my story is not an isolated event in this whole space. The MLM structure does seem to just breed these toxic work environments and unethical sales methods and sales models. And yeah, like I say, I think that the cult mentality is a really big part of that. So to categorize something as a cult, a lot of people use something called the BITE model. So the BITE model was developed by someone called Stephen Hassan, I believe was their name. And BITE stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And if something ticks off these criteria, then they're deemed to be a cult. And I firmly believe that MLMs tick off everything in this category. I mean, even just from my story alone, there's a lot of examples. The fact that we weren't allowed to say anything negative, always had to turn up with this false positivity, that's definitely clear behavior control. And the fact that if we did anything else, it was seen as sabotaging everyone else. So you've got that guilt there. I mean, throwing in the emotional control there as well. Information control. This mostly sits around like the statistics and information that MLMs like to throw out there. So the MLM that I worked at, the idea was that if you knocked on 100 doors, I think it was 100? Was it 50? Let's say 100 because the maths is easy. But anyway, out of those 100, 2 of those should be guaranteed sales. Like easy sales that anyone could get. You don't have to put any effort in. You basically knock on their door and they hand you their subscription. So 2 sales was supposed to be the minimum that everyone was achieving. And I can say with 100% certainty that that is not the average. It was never average, even for the whole office. Of course, some people would crush it on certain days, and even I had occasional days where I did well. But it was never enough to make up for the people who couldn't. For example, I remember one day I got 3 subscriptions, which was very, very good for me. I think they were the only 3 sales I've made that whole week. But everyone else that I was with got 0. And the information that was being touted out there was still that the average was 2, and the people who were out with me got berated for the fact that they got 0. And I was used as proof that it was possible, which made me very uncomfortable. Because, of course, there were days where I'd got 0 and everyone else had done well. Like, it wasn't anything about me, but it was the way of diminishing their zeros to make it seem like their fault. And so if you weren't able to get 2 sales for the day, the guilt was piled on. The guilt, the shame, everything. It was always your fault and you were always a failure. So T for thought control. Thought control is an interesting one. There's a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of overlap between the different categories in the bite model. And someone who knows more about it will definitely disagree with this, but these are my interpretations anyway. But I mentioned how by the end of my time in an MLM, I firmly believed that if I failed at this, I would fail at everything in life. Those were my genuine thoughts. That wasn't just what I was putting out there. Those were genuinely what was going through my mind. And I didn't put that thought out there. If you'd asked me before I'd started, I would have said, yes, of course I'm a terrible salesperson. So yeah, definitely thought control. And lastly, emotional control. This one does tie a lot into the other points because the emotions behind it, at least for me, steer a lot of the other things. But a really big thing that I did want to mention that MLMs do is the love bombing, and then whatever the opposite of that is, like the cold shoulder, I guess I'd call it. When you first join and when you have a good day, you are hyped up, you are the best person ever, you are on the way to becoming a successful business person, and you're set to, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss your way to the top, and everyone loves you. But then the second that you have a bad day, or question anything, or need some advice, or you're going through something personal and you're not able to bring the best vibes, people are vicious. I can remember talking to my team leader in the UK one time, and I was asking her for some tips because she sold very, very well, and I was having incredibly low sales, as I mentioned. And she told me that my sales were low because I was too upset about having low sales. So I was sabotaging myself. And so instead of giving me some genuine sales advice, she just berated me for the fact that I was upset about having no money. And then she got cross with me because I brought this up at the start of the day, and she was saying that my negative energy, thinking that I'm not going to get any sales, was going to rub off on the rest of the team, and that if everyone had a bad day, it was then because of me. So then, of course, you've got the guilt, the shame again, and so then those emotions keep you in check and stop you from questioning anything or saying anything. And while it seems very obvious now that it's manipulative, but at the time, I was young too. It was one of my first jobs. But if people say things enough, anyone's going to believe it. So yeah, we've covered BITE, and to me, that proves that they are a commercial cult. There's definitely people that strongly disagree with this, and that is fine. This is all just my personal opinion. But if anyone came to me asking me if they should get into an MLM, I would strongly recommend stay away. So to finish up, I did want to just chat about some of the weird stories that I have from my time in MLM, just to finish on a bit of a funnier note. I think they're mostly funny. I've written them down. If they're not funny, I'll cut them later. Finish on a lighter note, because like I say, this is just me ranting. So the first one is from my time in the UK, and I know that this story is going to sound so fake when I tell it, but I promise you it is 100% true. So something that was very, very common in MLMs is being demeaned and using that as a way to negatively reinforce what you want. So I mentioned earlier that the minimum sales for charity subscriptions was 2. So anyone who got a 3 or more was celebrated. We would have meetings every single morning, and anyone who got a 3, I think they called it a gong, and they would hit a gong to celebrate. And so all these people, their names would be called out, they'd hit the gong and they'd celebrate. People who got 0 were ignored. I think pretending that they don't exist was the strat there. We don't want to highlight that people went out and actually made no money. So those people were ignored. They didn't get any humiliation. It was just literally dead to them. But for people who only got 1 subscription, so they had some success but didn't meet this minimum that they said was the basics that everyone should get. So people who got 1 had to do an embarrassing chicken dance in front of the whole office. So I remember when I first arrived at the UK office and I saw this happen in a morning meeting, I asked my team leader why they did that, because I knew that I wouldn't be very comfortable doing that myself. And she said that the only reason that these people wouldn't have got more sales, because they got once, they've proven they can do it, the only reason they wouldn't have got more is if they'd chickened out. And so their punishment for chickening out was to do a chicken dance. Totally makes sense, right? Luckily, I never actually had to do this. I was so consistently on 0 sales that I very rarely made it to that criteria. But on the days where I did, I would also conveniently just be absent from the meeting on that day. I knew how many sales I got. I knew I could get away. I knew I could avoid it. My train would conveniently be late. What a shame I missed the morning meeting. So I guess in a way she was right. I chickened out. But yeah, so that's the chicken dance story. And like I say, it definitely sounds fake, but it was 100% true. I've got a couple of funny stories from my time selling in Australia as well. And most of them are just around crazy Aussie animals. Like we all know Australians are notorious for having insane animals. And nothing highlights that more than when you are walking around the streets all day. So the first was when I discovered the hard way what swooping season is. To any Aussies listening, they're probably already cracking up, but to anyone else, swooping season is the spring when magpies decide that they want to swoop at people and attack them because these people are near their nests. They're near their magpie nests. And I was warned about this at the start of spring. My team leader mentioned it in a meeting and I didn't believe him. So a couple of weeks earlier, my team leader had convinced me about drop bears. And so when he told me about the magpies, I didn't believe him. I was like, we have magpies in the UK. They don't attack anyone. This is clearly a lie. So I was quite happy in that knowledge, went out and got swooped that day. And because we were doing door to door and you're not allowed into people's houses in Australia if you're doing door to door, there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to escape. We had no indoor space in this residential area. So we got swooped continuously for about a solid half hour. Like I was swooped at least half a dozen times and we gave up on selling. We were just trying to find somewhere to duck and cover. Because the idea is that once you leave the area near their nests, they'll stop swooping. But that was our spot. That was our selling spot. All of the houses that we were knocking on were near that area. So there wasn't really anywhere that we could escape to. So that's when I learned that whilst Australians will tell a lot of lies, sometimes you have to believe their crazy animal stories because sometimes they are true. So, and the last funny story I have, this one is again an Aussie animal story, but we did a bit of a road trip out to regional New South Wales and we were staying in this like cabin thing and it had bunk beds. So I was staying on the top bunk of one of the bunk beds. Got up one morning, everything's fine, look back over at my bed and all I see is a really long, hairy leg poking up out of the mattress. And I can't see the body of this thing, but if the leg was anything to go by, I knew I didn't want to. So I put on my helpless English girl act, went to all these Aussie blokes and was like, oh my God, there's a spider, please come help me. And so they all came running over going, oh yeah, we're Australian. Yeah, let's take out this spider. Sorry, that was terrible. Anyway, so they all come in being uber manly and uber Aussie, and 10 seconds later they all run out saying that spider was way bigger than they thought. Because bear in mind, these are all Sydney spiders, we're regional. The spiders are made bigger in regional. Eventually, like one by one, they brave it. The spider survived being hit with a thong, a flip-flop to non-Aussies. It survived being hit with a magazine. Eventually, someone took it out by hitting it with a saucepan. But yeah, this thing was Aragog, I swear. And, you know, made a great story for the rest of the day when we were door knocking and talking to people. And they were just like, oh, whoa, what kind of spider was it? And I had no idea. So I just gave them a description. We concluded by the end of the day that it was a wolf spider based on everyone's feedback. And quick recommendation to everyone, if you're ever in Oz and you come across a spider and they tell you what type it is, do not Google it. Because you will almost certainly regret what you find because it is probably venomous or poisonous. But anyway, so that's the story of my time in a multi-level marketing scheme. And like I say, in my opinion, they are cults. I think that people should stay away. Please check out some of the amazing anti-MLM creators that I've linked below. They do a much better job of explaining it than me. I can only talk on my personal experiences. And I will say, I know it seems crazy looking back on my personal experiences and wondering like why I stayed as long as I did. All I can say is like I was young, I was naive. I was desperate to be liked, I was desperate for approval, and I was fairly new to the workforce, so I didn't really know what was weird, what was unprofessional. You know, I kind of just thought sometimes that I just couldn't take a joke, didn't understand what was going on, or I was just too inexperienced. And if you know anyone who's in this situation, I know it can be tricky to, you know, maintain support if, you know, they're being a bit annoying about it. But I think it's really important to remember that MLMs are built on recruitment, and the people who make money in an MLM, if you want to make significant money, you do have to recruit because the money from your individual sales, there's too much of a ceiling. You're never going to make a fortune like that. So people who say that they're making a fortune, it is almost certainly from recruiting. And so in that sense, the people who join an MLM are more victims of the MLM than anything else. So while they can sometimes be really annoying, sometimes patience will help a lot. Quite often the median income for an MLM is 0. So bear that in mind when you're talking to some people. Some people are really locked in and maybe feel like they're in too deep. Just be there. Just be a helping hand. Be like my friend Aaron. Help them out if they need it. Lend a supportive ear. We're really lucky that in Oz, MLMs aren't a huge thing, but they are still quite a prevalent thing in the US. And like I say, there's been a big movement to try and shift this business model. So if I can add any fuel to that fire, I definitely will. But that's it from me. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for just listening to me rant. I'll include links for anything that I've talked about or any research that I've done. If you've liked this, please, follow, like, subscribe, comment, all of that. I'd love to hear from you if you've got any personal experience with MLMs or even any questions. I can't guarantee I'll be able to answer them, but I can do my best. And yeah, I really do appreciate any of you who have taken the time to listen and watch and whatever else you're doing. So thank you, and I'll see you all next time.